Present.
Mr. Robert. Mr. Watson.
Present.
Mr. Judith.
Present.
Mr. Stringer.
Present.
Mr. Valentine.
Present.
All commission members present with the exception of Commissioner Roberts.
So, Chris, you got the lead, I guess?
Yes, sir. Whenever you're ready. So I have given you an executive summary. This is from the Easy Mile folks. These are the folks that would be providing the vehicle for the autonomous electric vehicle. And then I've also got their corporate presentation that I'll run through. I thought it would probably be helpful to just kind of go backwards and set the stage in terms of how we got to the place that we are with this. It goes back to just about a year ago when the state notified us that we were going to be offered to be a rising tide community, and we said yes, as you all know. And we then convened a group. We had 33 local leaders really across all the sectors in the community, faith-based, business-based, bankers, lawyers, social agency folks, just community representatives. It was a really good, very broad group. And we met together over the course of spring and summer last year and really talked very broadly about what kinds of things could bring benefit to the city of Adrian, what were our biggest needs. And there were really two issues that were universally and enthusiastically supported. One was housing. And as a result, we're looking at a couple of projects in Rising Tide that are housing specific, so that's the McKinley project. And what's now being referred to as the cannery project, so the tomato canning factory across from Cutler Jefferson. And then the other thing which rose to the top in a very powerful way was transportation. And in the transportation discussion, it was also really interesting because it was seen as such high value across the sectors. We think just because of our experience here, that certainly the human service organizations would be anxious to see it because they work with the folks every day that have the least amount of transportation options and the most challenges moving around the community. And they were certainly very enthusiastic about it and supportive of moving forward. I don't think it was surprising, but what was very powerful was the discussion from the businessmen who were in the room. And there were a couple in particular that had very powerful stories, and I'm thinking primarily, or most significantly, of Jeff Wyatt, the CEO of Ventures. So Jeff's, his dad founded Ventures, and they've kept it in Adrian when there was not just opportunity, but there was pressure to relocate elsewhere, closer to the customer base or closer to some other distribution centers. And they've kept it here, and today have about 120 some employees, 120 to 140 range employees there. And they do a lot of work to get employees in the place. Like everybody else these days, employment is a big challenge for them. And so they've been really creative. And so they're working with the ex-prison population, so they've got a specific program that'll help past offenders to get out and to get a fresh start in their life, including employment there. They've got an all-Spanish-speaking program for folks that could come to work that only have Spanish as their primary language. And one of the things that Jeff said in that discussion was that he estimates about 50% of his employees either walk or ride bikes to work. And so the idea that there would be transportation options available to them, a fixed route, was extremely appealing. He said could make the difference between them having full employment and not having full employment. And one of the things that was happening to Ventures right at that point in time, they were working with Ford Motor Company to get essentially a favored supplier status, and they got that status, and almost immediately were essentially offered an opportunity to about double his workforce. And the reason that he couldn't say yes right then is that he didn't know how we could get employees to work. So it was a very good discussion. At that point in time, The mayor and I had been talking about autonomous vehicles. You all know that we have a very good relationship with the University of Michigan Ford School, and they're sort of at the front of the line looking at policy issues around autonomous vehicles. And the vice dean at the Ford School that I work with on our projects when we got students here actually sat on the Regional Transportation Authority Board that you'll remember in the last election in Detroit was voted down, although a significant number of folks wanted it. A couple of executives in the northern suburbs did not, and as a result it narrowly lost. And you'll also remember that Detroit got eliminated from looking at Google because of transportation, so the transportation piece becomes very important. In any event, so we've been talking about this, and the mayor suggested to the group that one of the things that we could take a look at potentially was the growing field of autonomous vehicles. And I think had the mayor made some initial calls to a firm called May Mobility out of Ann Arbor. It's one of the tech transfer projects that's happening there. And in those early conversations with May Mobility, they suggested that they could completely equip the city of Adrian's bus transportation fleet with autonomous electric vehicles. Their vehicle was a 6-passenger vehicle, so it's quite small, but is currently operating in the city of Detroit on public streets, where it takes employees of Bedrock Mortgage to one of the 22,000 parking spaces that serve that company. It's also about to start operating, May Mobility is also about to start operating in Grand Rapids, where they will be taking over one of their downtown bus routes and will exclusively have those autonomous vehicles on it. They launched recently in Ohio, in Columbus, and they're doing a circle route in downtown Columbus, and they're also about to launch in Rhode Island, where they're doing and all of these are on public streets. They're doing a route that will go from a train station to a commercial district where there hadn't been any transportation provided before. So they're working on developing. So we worked throughout the summer with May Mobility and through the fall with them. When the governor came in August and we presented our project areas, we presented the goal of doing autonomous electric vehicles as part of as the centerpiece of our transportation system within the city. And May Mobility was at the meeting and was introduced there. Subsequent to that, we started moving forward with them and suggested that we should do a memorandum of understanding with them as we started looking for other ways to move this project forward. They came back and said absolutely they were more interested in doing a full contract with us, which was great. We suggested an MOU as kind of a precursor or first step, and the fact that they were interested in going all the way to a contract was of interest. So as it turned out, they then came back and said, no, actually we like the MOU idea, and so we said, fine, let's do that. And they were to send us the documentation that they used in setting that up with Grand Rapids. And they just got less and less responsive, and so we finally went to Plan B. And Plan B was Easy Mile. So the connection to Easy Mile, some of you may be familiar with an automotive company called Continental, and they produce the thing I think we would most be familiar with is tires. So it's a tire company, but it's an international firm out of Michigan, and they do a ton of work all over the planet, including a lot around autonomous vehicles. And in fact, they're one of the major investors in Easy Mile. And so, in our call to a senior vice president at Continental, they referred us and brought a call in together with Easy Mile. And subsequent to that, we've been working directly with Easy Mile on the proposal. So their vehicle is different, it's larger, it's a 12-passenger. And I'm going to run through their presentation now and then talk a little bit about what's happened subsequent to that. So there's a little bit of background on them. So they've been around for about 5 years, 150 employees. They're they're a worldwide firm, ECC headquartered in France, also operate out of Denver, and those are the folks we've been dealing with in Berlin, Singapore, and Adelaide, Australia. Privately funded, and you can see the Continental there as one of their funders. So, again, their basic perspective is that, and I think if you talk to anybody that's serious about the transportation industry, they're going to say that autonomous vehicles are here, and there's a zillion reasons for it. And the issue is, to some extent, how long is it going to take to get us from where we are to autonomous vehicles? In doing, the pretty significant amount of work around this that we've done over the last couple of years looking at this, we looked at this in the context of the DDA's parking. As we talked about the parking study that's going on right now, one of the things that they are thinking about as they're looking for the next 10 or 15 or 20 years is what impact will autonomous vehicles have on those guys. What it appears at this point in time is that the real growth in autonomous vehicles is probably going to go first to transportation like buses, because the challenge that you have to overcome, the idea of anybody having autonomous vehicles or anybody interacting with lots of autonomous vehicles is more significant than a single bus traveling around in essentially a circuit. And the universal reason to look at autonomous vehicles is all about safety. There's some pretty stunning statistics out there about them and what it could mean when we get to the place where it's normal, but suffice to say, thousands, tens of thousands of lives saved. So they also like the fact that there's more mobility possibilities and better uses of public space than, for example, parking lots and streets. So you can see that their focus has been to develop and deploy fully driverless mobility systems. That's a reference to the kinds of software that are out there right now, the 4.5, and discussion, kind of a look at what they do, the production and what's outsourced, etc. So Easy Mile is a French firm. And at this point in time, they're the only ones that make the kind of vehicle which could be utilized for the process. This is a really interesting chart because this talks about kind of the evolution of the autonomous vehicle industry. And so you can see that initially they started in gated communities, closed sites, then moved to hospital, universities, business parks. In 2018, last year, they moved to do last or first mile, so that's usually connecting to transportation hubs, whether that's buses or taxi stands or train stations or airports. And then in 2020, so in next year, rural mobility. So we're literally right on the cutting edge of the industry and looking at having a system up and operating here in 2020. Which is why we're in the place that we are right now. So I think it's interesting. Obviously, we didn't discuss this with them, but I thought it was interesting that we were right in their timeline. And it explains in part why Easy Mile was completely prepared to move forward with this demonstration grant with the U.S. Department of Transportation, and their vehicles are already certified to be on city streets, et cetera, and meet all the relevant criteria. Here again, they talk just basically about the importance of safety, and all of the folks in the autonomous vehicle industry are really talking about that. But kind of interesting, the numbers down at the bottom. So 210 sites that have this vehicle has been deployed, no collisions at all. The May Mobility folks have one collision on their record when a vehicle drove into the parked back end of one of their vehicles, and then about a month ago, their vehicle stopped when a pedestrian stepped out in front of it, and the vehicle behind them didn't stop and hit the back end of the vehicle. Other than that, those are the only issues that they've had on their public transportation pieces. And then you can see that they talk about reliability and support for our deployments, and 80 successful deployments and more than 200 experimentations. And this slide is about 6 months old. So here is the specific vehicle that we'd be talking about, the EZ10 autonomous, so it's driverless and fully electric. Up to 15 people can ride in the vehicle, 6 seated and 9 standing. It has an access ramp for mobility, so it meets the ADA requirements. So that 16 hours, so it can operate for 16 hours before it needs to be recharged. It'll operate on a pre-mapped network of roads, which is essentially what we're asking them to do. No need for additional infrastructure. Most of the fully autonomous vehicles today that are on the cutting edge do not require other technology. Some of the earlier ones did, and there was a lot of talk about connected vehicles and all that sort of thing, but essentially what's being designed today does not require that. There may be, depending upon the routes that we ended up with, there may be a communication link to traffic signals in a couple of cases. We're working on routes with them potentially right now that would describe how they would traverse the city. But essentially they don't need any others. So that's kilometers per hour, so they can operate where vehicles are going no more than about 30 miles an hour, and their vehicle runs maximum of just under or just over 18 miles an hour right now, this particular vehicle. So this is what they talk about in terms of what comes with it, the vehicle, end user applications. So these are all high-tech things so that you'll be able to look at your phone to find out where the vehicle is and when it's going to come to the stop near you. They have fleet management software and a control center. And they provide the services, feasibility and risk analysis, setup and deployment, operator training, support and maintenance, and software releases and upgrades. And all of those are part of the package. So essentially the price that we pay, they would come in and train all our staff. They actually have a maintenance contract where they maintain the vehicles, etc. So our staff don't do that. There are the places that it is deployed. It's actually in 23 countries right now, so 3 more than at this slide, 100 shuttles worldwide. Again, about 300,000 people were transported in the last year on Easy Mile vehicles, so it's got a lot of track record. And then this is where they talk about where they're operating. So again, they started in private sites and are now working on public roads, including first and last mile pedestrian controlled speed districts and tourist areas. And then for us, they're kind of branching out beyond that.
Chris, do you go back to that prior slide, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
There's a series of projects where they've operated, and again, this is about 18 months. This would have been 18 months ago when this slide was made. I should note that Michigan is one of a handful of states right now that have already put some laws on the books with respect to autonomous vehicles. So while this shuttle can operate without anybody in it, in Michigan, it is required that a courtesy driver be in the vehicle at all times. So that will be the case. If you were to get this grant from the U.S. Department of Transportation, all of those vehicles will have courtesy drivers in them. The same thing, May Mobility was also working on the same thing, and so they were also talking about how folks would be trained, what their responsibilities would be. But with these vehicles, if the need should occur, there would be a driver in the vehicle at all times, and so the vehicle isn't going to sort of wander around the city without any staff person inside. There are some of the public transportation firms that they are working with. So that's the rest of their slide presentation addresses autonomous vehicles that they're using in airports where they're actually doing luggage transportation using fully autonomous vehicles.
Go back to that map slide again, please.
Yep.
The math doesn't work out in my head, and I think I've seen a number wrong.
Okay. That one?
Yes. What's a deployment?
So that's a place where their vehicles have been put to use.
So they've got more than 200 deployments, and there's only 100 shuttles online right now. They're putting out half shuttles,
Don't know. Can't respond.
and then 100 shuttles, and there's 300,000 people transported. So that's only 3,000 people on a shuttle. I'm not that impressed with those numbers in terms of like adoption of it. So that's where I'm struggling with those numbers. And this is a sales pitch slide. So that's why I brought you back to it. They actually sent this to me on Saturday,
and so I haven't had a chance to talk to their staff about it. But my guess is that there were tests of the system, and so they would test the system out. If it was successful, that would be a successful deployment. Ours would be a deployment. If we got this and then after 3 years we didn't continue it, that number would go up. But I will find out the answer to that question this week. I don't know it offhand. So.
Yeah, it looks like it's possible if they just had some short-term deployments overall, the 100 currently run, but at times they had other deployments that ran for 6 months. And
that heightens my concern, because why didn't it stick?
it's from 2015, so could be a lot of reasons.
Yeah,
Could be someone
Sure,
tried
but
it,
if
it
this
didn't work for them,
right,
or-
but if these are tested in true solutions, you'd hope that there wouldn't be much delta between deployments and shuttles on the road, especially if in little old Adrian, we're looking at how many vehicles in our model. So right now, if we're average or smaller than average, I mean, that's not many spots that they're actively, I mean, that's 33 on the high side if we're average.
Mobility has 3. This is cutting edge. This isn't something that's been here for 20 years. This is
Right,
The
but
reason
that
we're looking at it
goes
is because it's
between-
cutting edge. So
Right, but that makes that delta between deployments and sites still working even greater.
But yeah, you don't really know though. I mean, you don't know if it was a cost issue, if it was a campus that put them on and said, oh, we're going to do something different. We either went with a different company, or we went with nothing at all.
Sure.
Maybe they didn't know their needs exactly well, so they put these things in and realized that they weren't being used as efficiently as they could be. I mean, it could be tons of things. But
I'm sure, knowing how this industry is working right now, that they went to some people and said, we would like to test our shuttles in your site for the next 6 months, for the next year, and they said, okay. So that would be a deployment, even though there wasn't necessarily an expectation that they were going to sell or lease vehicles.
I thought they got the bill.
So,
I think Brad's question is, like, we're supposed to vote on matching funds tonight, and this is a sales pitch to sell this idea to us, per se. So he has, I mean, that's a legit question, and
yeah.
and if you're pitching something, preparation's key to me, and especially when we're talking about taxpayer money. So,
Yep.
So I've got, can I go, or? Yeah. So we've talked about fixed routes, we've talked about stops, we've talked about it not that at some point in this document, it kind of says that we can freeform. What is it? I mean, is there a route that it goes on, period, or is it within the city limits, or talk to me about it, because if we're talking about stops, then that's kind of irrelevant.
So what we're working on with Easy Mile is routes within the city of Adrian. So let me step back and talk about the federal grant, because this is the reason that we're discussing this at all today is because the federal government put out a request for grants, for grant applications that would put autonomous vehicles on public streets throughout the United States. And so there's $60 million in a fund that was set aside. The grant just came out at the very end of December, and it's due Thursday. And they said, we are interested in communities that want to test autonomous vehicles in their communities. And we're interested in particular types of communities and particular environments to have those vehicles operate. And so We got this notice for funding about a month ago. We were made aware of it and discovered it through some research on our own. And we started looking into it to see what was involved. So they're looking for rural communities. That's one of the things that they are looking for. They're looking for communities that have unmet transportation needs. They're looking for low mod communities where there is a significant amount of the population that doesn't have good transportation choices. We're also very interested in communities like ours where we have post-secondary institutions and an opportunity to move the students around the communities, etc. They're looking for communities that can be self-contained, where these vehicles can meet a real need. And so that's the basis that we're coming at this from. So the routes that we are looking at are go-through communities, largely through the communities, the parts of our community where people have the least number of good transportation options. And they're designed to go to the places where they are potentially likely to work.
Can we talk about specifics, like what community, with this term communities, where?
So it's all our community, it's all the
I
city.
understand that, but like if we're talking about
So-
going through rolling meadows, or are we talking about going through, May, June, July dry? I mean, let's talk specifics, that'll be helpful.
So at this point in time, we have, and I should say, so the route determination is not central to the grant. In fact, even Easy Mile is not central to the grant. The grant isn't for a specific company. It's not for a specific route. It is for specific communities that are willing to host this. So Easy Mile has been there, has been incredibly professional in this process, and has provided us with a lot of materials to support their application. So we are working with them on 3 separate routes, essentially. 2 of them would encompass part of the east side and south side of the city. One would get the north and west side of the city that we're looking at right now. They would circulate to the colleges, but they would go through neighborhoods. So they would go through neighborhoods on the east side and the southeast side. They would run along Beecher Road, where our major employers are, from Tita on one side of Plastic Omnium on the other side.
At 18 miles an hour, you're going to send them down Beecher Street?
We can send them down most of Beecher Street. So they would catch the southern commercial district by probably going down Winter Street, where they can go down safely. They would all come to downtown, so downtown would be the point of exchange. So if you wanted to go from one to the other, that's where they would run. So that's the kind of draft route that we're looking at. We put that together with engineers from Easy Mile so that they could see in general what we wanted to do. They came back and said, this won't work. We would have said, how about this? So we've done some back and forth like that. We will continue to do that to fine tune it so that it provides the greatest benefit to the citizens of the community and the safe experience as well, and on roads that the vehicle can safely traverse. So none of that is set in stone at this moment in time.
So you still haven't answered the question. Are these fixed routes, or are they just
Yes.
fixed areas?
They're fixed routes. So they would have a
So
specific
it'd be like a conventional bus stop on a pole, like I pick up my
That's correct.
Easy Mile right here.
That is correct. Yep, that's correct.
Can,
So, go ahead.
Can you compare contrast this to a dial-a-ride experience?
Sure. So on a fixed route system, whether it's autonomous or not, you go to station X at a certain time and the vehicle is there. When we ran our fixed route pilot 8 years ago, we had fixed routes that we, again, put together locally, together with business support that we got and support from the schools, and we ran a route that also was a little bit on the cutting edge in that you could have an app for your phone that told you when the vehicle was coming, which worked not beautifully, but you could see the technology coming. So in this case, you will be able to know exactly the minute that vehicle comes to your stop and how many minutes it is away and all those kinds of things. And then it'll run to your, it'll come to your stop, and then it will go on a fixed route, which will be on the inside of the vehicle, so you can see where it's going, where the stops will be. And then if you want to change buses, when you arrive downtown, when the next bus going whatever direction you want to go goes. So the on-demand system that we have right now, if you need to go someplace, you call up and you say, okay, I've got a doctor's appointment or I want to go shopping down here. And you essentially get in a queue. And when the vehicle that's on duty at that point in time gets to your place in the queue, they come by and get you. You don't know when that's going to be. And then they take you to wherever location you want to be. And then when you need to leave, you call them again, you wait again. Essentially, if you have an appointment, you have to be at a certain place at a certain time, you pretty much dedicate half of your day to it, just in terms of the wait time and where you have to go. The on-demand system will still operate when this system or any other fixed route system is operating. That's also a requirement. So the federal government requires us, if we offer any vehicle service at all, we have to offer an on-demand service for people who are not able to get to the bus stops. So our on-demand system would continue to operate as it does right now. People who need to get to a certain place at a certain time and want to do the dial-a-ride experience will still have that as an option for them. So as long as we offer any bus service at all, we are federally required to operate an on-demand system. So that will continue to happen.
Thank you.
Yes.
Chris, unless I'm just not seeing it here, I see some numbers as far as leasing costs and things, but what's the amount of the grant?
So we're actually still working on a draft budget for it. At this point, I'd say we were about $2.2 million for the grant because we, the $200,000
for 3 years?
For 3 years, that's correct. So our resolution today to apply $200,000 is the sum total of the city's commitment for it. So the grant we are building and the asset we're making will cover all the other costs that are related to the bus service. And candidly, as a pilot project, what will happen as we move forward is that grant will get amended. It's the norm when you do projects like this, that those kinds of evolutions take place because there are unknowns. It's a pilot, and the federal government knows it's a pilot, and we know it's a pilot. But we are working, again, very closely with the Ford School at the University of Michigan. We've essentially asked them to do all of the reporting and the data work on this and to essentially manage that side of it. I will be on the phone this evening when we're done talking to the Ford School about that. So we're building a budget that will hire someone to manage this. So our present staff, Marcia Bohannon, and the staff that work right now won't have additional duties assigned to them as a result of this. I think that going forward, one of the real possibilities that as this vehicle comes in and begins to be used in the community and we see a fall off of requests for the on-demand service, that we will be able to use those on-demand drivers as courtesy drivers in these vehicles. We actually specify that in the grant that would be the first place that we would look to employ the folks that are the courtesy drivers in these vehicles. As I said, we're at about $2.2 million right now, and that looks at staffing and other costs that would be related to this. And the whole data management piece, which is really big. Again, the federal government's overriding reason for doing this is to determine the safety of these vehicles so that it can be measured and understood and evaluated.
So Chris, you're saying again, $200,000 out of our pocket over 3 years.
Correct.
Okay.
If you're curious about the dial-ride numbers, Nathan has those. What we're already spending on dial-ride, he's got the breakdown for the last 10 years.
And what happens when the grant runs out after 3 years? Do we have to reapply for it, or are we on the hook for the 2 point whatever, or how's that work?
Nope. So the grant, that money will be expended, whatever the number is of the grant that we apply for. The other costs related to this will be covered by that grant. And at this point, if they were done and we were done, we would be done with the grant, and this will become another deployment. Obviously, our hope is that while we're working with this, we're already starting to work on the federal side. So right now, autonomous vehicles are not subsidized like our present transportation system. So surface transportation in Michigan is generally subsidized at about 50%, roughly 50% of the actual cost of it. So we get some of that money from the feds and some of that money from the state. And we would look to see the same kind of support for autonomous vehicles going forward. So certainly my hope would be in the ideal world that we would transition from this being a pilot to something that we operate on an ongoing basis for the community. Because again, I think it's the direction that we will need to go in order to be competitive. We were at a transportation summit a couple of weeks ago in Lansing, and I can tell you that every single expert on the dais talked about autonomous vehicles and why autonomous vehicles were where we needed to start thinking, planning, and preparing, because that's where it's going. So we're right in line with that.
Who actually owns the buses?
So we have two options. We could purchase them actually for slightly less than we could lease them, so $1.6 million, or we could lease them for $1.7 million, a little over $1.7 million. If we chose to purchase them, the grant would pay for those vehicles, and we would own them outright at the end of it. The sticky wicket on this yet, and we haven't resolved the last piece of it, is that the legislation that enables this grant also references Buy American. So there's a Buy American policy that the federal government has. The mitigating factor is that there isn't a U.S.-made vehicle of comparable size or ability. And so it's likely that if we wanted to purchase them, we could apply for a variance for the Buy American or Buy U.S. portion of the grant. I think probably that's assured if we wanted to do that, but we want to know that definitively before we wrap up the application.
So if we lease, then who maintains the buses?
So they do. So there is as part of that, as part of the agreement with them, they would actually maintain the vehicles.
So they're taking care of the software.
Yes, upgrading the software.
Does that mean that they have somebody here, or is this something that we're calling tech support?
Yeah, it's tech support. They would not have somebody on site working on the vehicles. The vehicles are all electric. There are very few moving parts. They require very little maintenance. So that's one of the real sales factor for the electric autonomous vehicles in general, is that they're just got far less moving parts, are far less expensive to maintain.
I started reading about safety issues, and from my reading, it backs up what you were saying as far as safety. But when accidents happen, who's liable? You know, I mean, we're leasing them, or if we own them, is it the software company? Because obviously something happens there.
If the buses are safe, that would mean people driving on the roads are safe. Somebody blows a stop sign and smokes a autonomous bus, are we on the hook? Who's on the hook?
Probably the same thing that Dial Ride.
Right.
Same thing where you're doing buses that ride the road.
Especially no fault insurance.
Yeah.
It's not really. It's like the skate, like we put the ice rink in. I mean, we already paid for the insurance for the skate park. We're already paying for insurance for buses to traveling people around town. So.
And the other piece with the lease side, so Easy Mile has a liability piece on the lease side. So they're actually insuring the vehicles that are leased from them if we lease them. We choose to do that.
So say at the end of 3 years, we lease these vehicles. At the end of the 3 years, no one rides them. It's just not something that city building residents are interested in. We're done. We can just send them back, and we tried, like we tried before, to do a fixed route, and just we're done. Okay.
Yeah. The difference between this time and the one we tried before was the one we did before was a Thursday, Friday, Saturday night.
Just Thursday and Friday.
It was Thursday, Friday, so it was aimed generally at college students, I would say, for the most part.
Right.
This is aimed. The whole point of this is, I mean, well, first of all, I have a couple comments on Dial Ride. Dial Ride, you know, when we're asking how does Dial Ride work, that shows that we're not using it. So, I mean, the only reason I know is because I've had customers that have had to help them call and things like that. You know, it's 45-minute wait for them to get picked up, then they get taken somewhere. So if you have an appointment at a certain time in a certain place on Dial Ride right now, say you have a noon appointment, you can't call at 11 o'clock and hope that you're gonna be there at noon. You're talking 10, 10:30, you really don't know what's gonna happen, how busy they are, when you're gonna get picked up. Then you go to your appointment, then you gotta call them again, same process goes through. I mean, so really you are taking a half of your day to do a half-hour appointment at a doctor's office or something like that. And the last 3 people I've called on, all 3 of them waited at least 45 minutes in my store to get picked up. And the last guy told me, you should have seen how long I waited before they picked me up to bring me here. So that's part of it. I mean, Dial Ride is very inefficient as far as someone trying to plan their day and get anything done. The other thing I'd say is we're putting $200,000 in for 3 years. If I'm not mistaken, the fares we've been taking in from Dial Ride is about $60,000 a year, between 50 and 60. So in 3 years, we're going to get 150 to 180,000 back if we get the same kind of ridership on these autonomous buses that we get on Dial Ride, which I think we're getting it more. And the whole reason we're going with the autonomous system is because it gives it a cool aspect, so that people that aren't using Dial Ride are going to use it. Because people aren't using Dial Ride, there's maybe a stigma attached to it. It's basically, and it's so inefficient. The only people that use it are people that absolutely have to use it because they have no other choice. So by putting this bus system in, we can basically subsidize some of our most vulnerable residents by us using it as well. And I think I think students will use it. I think we'll have people coming out of town to go have dinner, just to ride the bus around, to go to the football game at homecoming at Adrian College or Siena Heights. I'll take the bus downtown instead of trying to find parking. People can park downtown and take the bus to the college if they want to go to a game. It could prevent us from having to buy parking lots because people are going to. I mean, that was part of our DEA presentation we got on Wednesday. MSU Extension basically said one of the big aspects that we need to work on is public transportation. So we could put in a fixed system with a bus driver, but is that going to make people use it? Are they going to use it still? I don't think so. I mean, I think we need to be cutting edge and say, hey, this is something cool. This is something Adrian's doing. I mean, I don't want to pick on him, but if you would have told me 6 months ago or 6 weeks ago that a cigar bar would be popular in town, I might have questioned it. And I'm not questioning it today. So there's things you can do to get people here, and you can't expect people to move here and then tell people, oh, well, someday we're going to be cutting edge or someday we're going to be cool. We need to kind of do it and then draw the people here. And I can imagine like tech firms coming just to watch this and see this happening, engineers being here maybe weekly from other companies around the world to see what's happening here, because they're not going to be able to see this anywhere in the United States. They're going to have to go to Europe or Asia.
There's a dot right on the United States, sir. What do you
Yeah,
mean?
it's Denver. That's their home office.
Well, doesn't it mention?
Yeah, there's a project. I don't
Campus,
think
but
there's
not like a full system like
Yeah,
we're going to have.
right.
I thought you said Grand Rapids is doing something.
That's the other
one route.
different system, smaller vehicles, different system. That's going to happen this spring in Grand Rapids.
And it's just one route. It's just
one of
one
their
little circular
downtown
route
routes.
downtown. This is going to be a fully integrated system throughout the whole city,
Right.
where it's going to be designed from the ground up.
One thing that I think is real interesting about this is if we did this, we're gonna get a lot of notoriety. I mean, I can see from all over the United States. And when you get that notoriety, they're not just going to talk about the buses. They're gonna talk about the city, and they're gonna talk about what we're doing with apartments downtown. They're gonna talk about the Kiwanis Trail and how that's been expanded. They're gonna talk about how we're a bike-friendly community. They're gonna look at a bigger part of the picture than just the buses, I think. And so now maybe you're appealing to somebody who's working in Ann Arbor, but they don't like the cost of living in Ann Arbor. So now they're thinking, okay, I can live in Adrian. They have some cool things. They have a very family-friendly community, and I don't have to leave my job in Ann Arbor. But I just think I think part of our job is to help market the city, and I think that's what we'd be doing by moving in this direction. My biggest concern was cost, and so we're talking less than $70,000 a year over the course of 3 years.
Right, a lot of that will be back in fair money.
Right.
So forth.
But I guess I don't want to depend on that. Yes.
Sure.
So we're gonna invest $66,000 a year. I mean, we could hire a marketing person to do that, to market the city.
I think it drives people around town.
What?
Marketing person would drive people around town.
So
A
let me-
15-person cargo van.
So let me say a couple more things. I'm also gonna pass around, so we're getting really broad support. So here are an example of some of the letters that we're getting. But I wanted to say a couple of things. One is, last week, the state of Michigan Economic Development Corporation did a pilot project here in Adrian, and it was bringing frontline staff from a bunch of state agencies together in our community. And so this meeting has happened over the years, but always in Lansing, they get together and meet and talk. And Paula Holtz from Tecumseh, former colleague who's now with the MDC, said, you know, we should take this meeting out to communities and meet with actual community members in actual communities so we can see how things go. So it was a really interesting meeting. We did it at the Armory. We talked together for 2.5 hours. I talked about all the things that are happening in the community, and we went in detail on all the Rising Tide projects. And this was the project that got the most excitement from those professionals, those young professionals that were there, by far. And in fact, after that, I would say I got 6 or 8 emails back connecting me to other people at the state level or quasi-state agencies that are working on autonomous vehicles that heard what we're doing, what we're talking about here. So I think unquestionably this would be a major attractor to the community, a major focus that would give us a tremendous amount of attention. There are going to be a handful of cities in the country that are going to be doing this, that are going to receive that federal grant, and I think we have a real possibility of being one of those. The other thing is I want to apologize to you for the fact that you're hearing so much so quickly in such a short time frame. And the reason for that is that we're literally running as we're going on this. So we were researching ways to bring funds to this. So once, I had started that work before Mary Zumbrunn, our Rising Tide Fellow, got here in December, and she was working on it. And then again at the end of January, first part of February, is when we became aware of this grant. So we've been working like crazy on it. We literally just got the numbers and stuff and got the rough finalized about 2 weeks ago so that we could even apply for the grant. So, and it was clear at that point in time there was very broad support for it, both with our state partners and Easy Mile and others. And so, it's not the way, I've sat in your seats, it's not the way I would prefer to do it. We have talked about this. You guys were aware of this project and what we were going to do. You were aware of what the projects were that we settled on. I know we've talked, in a sort of general way about the possibility of something being in front of us that we would have to select. But candidly, we didn't expect this. We were not aware this grant was rolling out. I think very few people were, and so we just worked extremely hard to put it together. A couple of pieces I think that are worthy of note. One is that when we found out that we were going to have a chance to apply for it, I went to the Ford School and talked to the vice dean there, who was our contact and certainly a supporter of the city. She provided a grant-funded student to us, an intern, that is working for the city of Adrian without any cost to us. Up to 20 hours a week on this grant and on this project. So she will continue to work on this. She worked in Washington, D.C. in the Department of Transportation Executive Offices last year as her internship. So unbelievably talented young woman. And she's really taking the lead on putting this material all together in a package. And we think that we're going to finalize tonight and tomorrow. The Ford School is going to partner with us very closely and actually dramatically strengthen our application by having, the number 1 or number 2, depending upon who you listen to, public policy school in the United States partnering with us, doing the same kind of cutting edge work they do across the planet in all kinds of different ways, but working with Adrian, Michigan because of our relationship with them. So it's not the way I would do it in a perfect world. It's not the time that I would have materials in front of you in a perfect world. But it's where we are. It's an opportunity that I think is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And I think over 3 years, there's a relatively small risk that we take that's going to leverage millions of dollars into the community.
Is there any
aspect of the future of, the state not requiring a person on the bus, and that's not Tom's bus.
So
And it
it's
defeats
law
the
right
purpose.
now, so they would have to go back to the legislature and say, we wanna change this law. I don't see it happening for the foreseeable future. Eventually, I'm positive it will happen.
I just think it's I mean, I understand it, but yeah, I think it's kind of, it's bad optics, to say it a different way, but also, autonomous vehicles for your personal use are coming. I mean, they're building them, they're designing them now, they're beyond design factor, I mean, they're out there.
Right.
But it's not for sale to the general public, but they're in test mode. It might be 3 to 5 years before we even see them for sale, who knows?
Right.
But at some point, we know there's multiple car manufacturers that are doing R&D on it now and building those.
Everyone.
And then, yeah, and their plan is to, that'll be the next, vehicle revolution, so to speak. So, start with busing and route it that way, I think makes sense. And I think I've been on this thing for 6 years now, and I think before that even there was talk of we did the test for the fixed route. And there was a lot of work trying to get a fixed route busing system in the past couple of years that didn't work. And it was all about funding. It was all, we didn't have a grant that would meet what we wanted to do. And now knowing that we have the option for that, I think that's a good idea. I think it stinks that they're this expensive. And I think it's a lot of money, but I also think that it could serve a bigger cause than just, it'll do more than 2 or 3 things at once by transportation as well as bringing some attention, obviously is good, but I agree in a way that if it's just marketing, that's not the only reason to do it, and I think there has to be some feasibility behind that, and it makes sense. And to me, on the surface, it looks like something that would provide a service and would provide a needed service.
Do we know how much ridership the city of Detroit has on the queue?
On the system that it has?
Yeah, the one that, what's it, the queue? The one that runs up and down Woodward?
Oh, the Q line you're talking about.
Yeah, the queue.
Okay, I'm sorry, I thought you said cube, sorry. No, I don't know what ridership looks like on that, so I have not studied that.
So how does this grant and these numbers come together? We apply for the grant, and if we get the grant, then we have these numbers to work with from this company. I guess the only thing that's kind of bothering me at this point is, like you said, in a perfect world, we wouldn't have our back up against the wall on this. To me, it seems like this is kind of a win-win for both, to be a win-win for both Adrian and this company.
Yes.
I guess I feel like if we had the grant, maybe we could negotiate a better deal so that we're not paying the $60-some thousand a year. I mean, because they're going to get benefits from it too. And because of the grant, it's not a giveaway for them. So, I mean, would that be?
There's nothing, as I said, the grant is not tied to Easy Mile. The grant is for autonomous vehicles, and so I think we could very well say, okay, we've got the grant now, let's talk.
Yeah, I guess that's.
I have no idea whether that's doable at all, but
Well,
I can't imagine. I mean, I'd certainly be happy to have that conversation with them. And if any other providers were available.
It's not a requirement that we put in that 10 or 20% for the grant, is it?
There is technically no match required for the grant. What the grant language says, however, is that it's unlikely you'll be funded if you don't have a grant match in it, and typically the minimum amount is 10%, so we'll be under the 10% if it comes out at 2.2 or 2.3 as we anticipated. So.
I also can't believe that there would be too many cities our size that would be going for this grant. So
One of the questions when we were talking to DOT staff, because we've asked them for a letter of support, was we don't know of anybody else applying for this. Do you know of anybody else applying for this? And I said, I am not aware of anybody else that's applying for it. So my guess is that no one else in Michigan is applying for this.
So what does this mean that it's a part of the Rising Tide program, other than it came out of that meeting? Like, are there resources associated with it that would come from the state? Are there, where does it fit in, and how does that project initiative work with this?
So Rising Tide again really speaks to the coordination of state resources to address the projects that we're doing. So all of the projects that we're doing, we're seeing an elevated level of coordination with state agencies, with us and with each other to help these projects take place. So we're getting extra effort. We're also seeing grants come through because we're a rising tide community. We're getting extra points on grant applications and that kind of thing. I think the fact that we're a rising tide community increases our chances of getting this grant. So
You're saying that the federal Department of Transportation understands what rising tide is, and that we are a select community because we are a rising tide.
that's part of our story that we're telling us. And certainly if we get the governor's letter of support, as we've asked, that she's likely to reference that Michigan is one of our 10 rising tide communities in the state. So. But we're going to make that part of our narrative, certainly.
All right, we gotta do public comment. Anyone have any public comment?
Thank you very much.